Tales of the Migration, how our ancestors walked around the world and what they can teach us about our human family. Believe it or not, our recent ancestors walked around the world. During the last ice age, sea levels were 400 feet lower than they are today, continental shelves were exposed, so humans could walk from Africa to Asia, most of the way from Asia to Australia, and from Siberia to Alaska across the Bering Strait. Recent genetic evidence has revealed how this journey took place. To humanize these history-changing discoveries, I want to share a series of stories that chronicle key steps along the pathway of human migration. I'm seeking to publicize the recent genetic evidence suggesting that all humans are descended from a small number of behaviorally modern Homo sapiens living in Africa 50,000 years ago. By shedding light on this discovery, I hope to create an awareness of our common heritage to encourage people to embrace our shared humanity. As wonderful as the fictional worlds of J.R.R. Tolkien, George R.R. Martin, or even George Lucas are, that many people look to for human origin stories, here is an evidence-based history that is just as amazing. My involvement with this project began on December 10, 2013, 5 days after the death of Nelson Mandela. I was reading a newspaper article about Mandela's funeral and wondered what I could do with my life that would be valuable. I didn't want to spend 27 years in prison as Mandela had done, but then I thought of Al Gore and his acclaimed global warming slideshow and realized I could do that. I hit upon the idea that as a pathway to peace, I could publicize the new genetic evidence presented by Spencer Wells in the documentary film The Journey of Man, a genetic odyssey, suggesting we're all closely related to one another. The human genome, completed in 2022 after the initial sequencing of 2003, has provided a window on our past. Nicholas Wade, in his book Before the Dawn, explains the genome has undergone constant revision throughout its history and retains evidence of its previous drafts. This new genetic evidence contributes to the work of paleoanthropologists, archaeologists, anthropologists, and other specialists. For example, it reveals when humans began to wear clothing about 72,000 years ago, and when the FOXP2 gene for speech appeared at least 125,000 years ago. Human migration can be traced through the Y chromosome, which is responsible for making people male. It usually passes unchanged from a father to his son, but when a mutation occurs, that mutation can be traced as a marker of descent. Geneticists have taken blood samples from isolated groups of people and used the genetic markers on the Y chromosome to determine the path of human migration over the last 50,000 years. First, I want to clarify which group of ancestors I'm discussing. Some of you may have heard of Ardi, an Ardipithecus ramidus, who lived 4.4 million years ago. Others may have heard of the Australopithecus fossil found in South Africa and dated in 2022 to 3.4 to 3.6 million years ago. More of you have probably heard of Lucy, an Australopithecus afarensis named after the Beatles song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, who lived 3.2 million years ago. Then there were the Homo erectus, who left Africa and settled in Asia 1.8 million years ago. Finally, there were the famous Neanderthals, whose ancestors left Africa between 300,000 and 400,000 years ago and survived in Europe until about 35,000 years ago. But the group I'm concerned with, behaviorally modern humans, stayed in Africa until 50,000 years ago. Anatomically modern humans were living more than 100,000 years ago, and an X-ray of them would appear identical to a contemporary human. But behaviorally modern humans appeared about 50,000 years ago. They behaved like living hunter-gatherers, making advanced tools out of stone as well as bone, antler, and ivory. Their weaponry was more advanced than earlier hominids, and they wore ornaments made from teeth, shells, and ivory. They even buried their dead with rituals. 50,000 years ago, the northern latitudes were encased in ice. Though Africa was not cold, it suffered from a devastating drought. Like the never-ending winter in the north, the southern drought was taking lives. Only a few people survived. The situation was bleak, but a few hardy souls were poised for a new beginning. As the sun baked the land, killing off plants and animals, a courageous few followed the herds in search of food. Those who moved on would survive. They would bear children and replenish the earth. Their descendants would populate the planet. At the time, during the last ice age, glaciers spread across North America, Northern Europe, and Asia. Sea levels dropped 400 feet, and the exposed continental shelves formed land bridges between the continents, enabling animals and people to make previously unimaginable journeys. Australia, which had been cut off for 85 million years, was suddenly reachable by humans. And a land bridge replaced the Bering Strait, linking Asia with the Americas, allowing humans to migrate to a new world. Ironically, the life-threatening challenges of the African drought led to the emergence of modern humans. Only the most clever and fit could survive. At the drought's height, only about 5,000 people remained, living in small groups, desperately seeking water and food. But they developed a toughness that allowed them to spread across the planet. Their intelligence and creativity enabled them to face new challenges and find innovative solutions to the problems they faced. They developed new ways of doing things and a memory of what had been done before, which marks the beginning of culture. When I say our ancestors walked around the world, I'm not talking about a continuous march. I mean that each new generation was encouraged to move out and develop a life of its own. Step by step, generation by generation, over the course of 40,000 years, our ancestors populated the planet. Some of the tensions that led to this migration included aggression between young men, the search for new food supplies, the search for new mates, and a desire to expand tribal domain. Imagine the first people to leave Africa. Imagine a boy on the verge of adolescence. His father has determined it's time to flee the unlivable conditions in Northeast Africa by crossing the body of water now known as the Red Sea. He knows that others have tried this journey and have disappeared without a trace, but he feels they have no choice. The family builds a raft and evades hostile members of their own kind, as well as the ancient fierce people of legend, the Neanderthals, who have previously prevented others from escaping the drought in Africa. But miraculously, they survive the crossing and arrive in the land beyond to begin the human journey around the world. Afterwards, their descendants migrated along the southern coast of Asia and, according to some estimates, walked across the exposed continental shelves to within 60 miles of Australia, which had not been connected to another landmass for 85 million years. The first humans reached the new continent about 45,000 years ago, just 5,000 years after leaving Africa. But despite the lower sea levels, these pioneers still had to cross at least 60 miles of open ocean to reach Australia. Imagine the first people who made that crossing. Imagine a young girl watching her father looking out to sea from their South Asian home. He has noted smoke in the distance over the water and observed birds flying toward the horizon but never returning. He assumes there is inhabitable land over the horizon to which his family can escape from the overcrowded, conflict-ridden mainland. He builds a type of bamboo raft that coastal fishermen, including the Homo erectus, have used for thousands of years. He has an idea of heading out to sea in search of a new land. And after evading hostile neighbors and surviving storms at sea, the family reaches the new land, complete with animals never before seen. And they begin a life in the newly discovered landmass known to scientists as Sahul. A second group of adventurers set out from the Middle East and followed the animals to the grasslands of Central Asia. With food plentiful, their numbers increased with each new generation. They expanded their territory advance, but despite an abundance of animals, living conditions were harsh. They had to adapt to the cold climate, making clothing from animal skins and weapons from stone, to kill reindeer and mammoths for food. They hunted under the open sky on the wide plain with hawks and eagles overhead. Imagine the first people to reach Central Asia. Imagine a young man with wife and child living in Southwest Asia being forced to move north away from his childhood home. The family is warned about ice and snow in one direction and the hostile ice people, the Neanderthals, in the other. But despite the challenges, they reach the grasslands to establish a new home in a land of plenty. Eventually, modern humans migrated west from the Central Asian territory now known as Kazakhstan. Reaching the lands of modern Germany and France with their superior brain power, they were able to outcompete and ultimately replace the original inhabitants of Europe, the Neanderthals. The Neanderthals had been well adapted to survive the Ice Age. With their short limbs and powerful bodies, they were suited to the cold. Through physical strength alone, they've been able to thrive for hundreds of thousands of years. But they were not intellectually equipped to compete with the clever newcomers, who brought with them superior tools and a more sophisticated social structure, allowing them to work together and hunt efficiently in groups. In the battle between brain and brawn, the newcomers outcompeted the Neanderthals for food and other resources, leading to the isolation and ultimate disappearance of the Neanderthals in just a few thousand years. With their smaller bodies, the newcomers needed fewer calories to survive, and they lived longer. With their more sophisticated language, they had a greater capacity to conceptualize, and their creativity far outstripped the Neanderthals. Modern humans were able to adjust their behavior to meet the challenges of the changing environment better than the Neanderthals. The modern humans fashioned tools from bones and ivory. They produced artwork and celebrated the seasons of life in elaborate rituals. They learned to fish and conquered the planet, pushing pre-modern hominids to extinction. They lived in larger groups than Neanderthals, trading beads and shells and changing residence with the seasons, and creating sophisticated cave paintings. By 30,000 years ago, they had come to dominate Europe after the last Neanderthals had died out, leaving modern humans as the sole surviving human species. But imagine the first encounters between modern humans and the ancient species. Perhaps an adolescent male is feeling restricted at home. He sneaks out and enters the forbidden forest, encountering a Neanderthal girl. The two are fascinated with each other, but several older Neanderthal men chase the boy away. He runs through the forest and jumps into a river, floating to safety. But having encountered the legendary ice people and having witnessed their archaic humanity, he encourages the hot-headed warriors of his tribe not to attack the ancient people unnecessarily. Other humans migrated eastward from Central Asia. The most hardy were those who reached the frozen tundra of Siberia about 35,000 years ago, and by 13,000 years ago had reached the eastern edge of Siberia, poised to cross over to America. Their lives were dependent upon the reindeer, and eventually realized life would be easier if they domesticated them. Imagine the lives of the ancient reindeer hunters. Imagine a young girl who forms a close bond with an orphan fawn. She loves her reindeer, but a less sensitive, older man thinks reindeer should be killed since they're just a commodity to be exploited. The reindeer dies, but the heartbroken girl is convinced her new attitude of a closer relationship between humans and reindeer is the correct one. As game animals crossed the land bridge to America, a few hardy humans followed, enduring the worst climatic conditions on the planet before that temporary pathway was cut off about 10,000 years ago by rising sea levels. These hunters were well equipped to deal with a harsh environment, but even they were held back by the ice that covered eastern Alaska and Canada. Only when an ice-free pathway east of the Rocky Mountains opened up did the herds of animals follow the trail of vegetation, with the hunters close behind. For the early inhabitants of Ice Age North America, life was desperate. Imagine their struggles. Imagine a boy slipping out on a personal quest, crossing a glacier, but suddenly from a hillside, he observes a sea of grass. He runs down the hill and wades into the waist-high grass. He realizes he has discovered a new land and escaped from Beringia, the land bridge between Siberia and Alaska. The plains of North America were a land of plenty, but with the arrival of humans and their advanced hunting techniques, species were driven to extinction, including mammoths, camels, and horses. The human population had exploded, and within 1,000 years, humans had reached the southernmost point of South America. By reaching Tierra del Fuego about 10,000 years ago, they had completed their habitation of the continents, with the exception of Antarctica. Only the conquest of Oceania remained. From Southeast Asia, around 10,000 years ago, large canoes packed with humans ventured across the Pacific in death-defying voyages until almost all the major islands were inhabited. Polynesian agriculture had allowed the adventurers to set sail. By taking their plants with them, they knew they would have food wherever they settled. Unlike the earlier hunter-gatherers, who had to depend on what they could find. These explorers could sail with confidence into uncharted waters since they took their food supply with them. But imagine the islands becoming overpopulated. A young girl from Rarotonga accompanies her family on a voyage across the open ocean in search of a new land. The island of her birth has become overcrowded and her family must leave. After a perilous trip, they reached the legendary islands of Aotearoa, now known as New Zealand, and the human journey is complete around 800 years ago. But at the end, reflecting the ever-curious human imagination, the girl looks up at the stars and says, "I wonder if we could go there." Time and again, with humans facing extinction, their ingenuity emerged to create new opportunities and a new beginning. In the cosmic blink of an eye, humans had populated the world. Now it is time for contemporary people to rediscover their roots and realize just how closely related to each other we are, so we can truly become a planetary human family living in harmony on the only home we will ever realistically have. Thinking about our home in the vastness of space, we must learn to love and cherish one another as fellow travelers on whom we all depend. In the words of Adlai Stevenson, American UN ambassador during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, we travel together, passengers in a little spaceship, dependent on its vulnerable reserves of air and soil, all committed for our safety to its security and peace, preserved from annihilation only by the care, the work, and the love we give our fragile craft, and I may say, each other. As famed economist and U.S. presidential advisor John Kenneth Galbraith has stressed regarding the aftermath of a nuclear war, communism and capitalism, as well as Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and so forth might well be indistinguishable in the ashes. My purpose is to create an awareness of the genetic evidence that establishes our species as one small, closely knit human family. As the late astronomer Carl Sagan stated, the cosmos may be densely populated with intelligent beings, but there will be no humans elsewhere. Only here, only on this small planet. We are a rare as well as an endangered species. Every one of us is, in the cosmic perspective, precious. If a human disagrees with you, let him live. In 100 billion galaxies, you will not find another. Thank you.